to have 3 presentations, but actually we have 2 presenters. One could not make it to Korea, I think. So we have plenty of time, and we'll have 2 presentations. And I think 20 to 25 minutes for each presenter will be okay. And then they will be followed by discussions by 2 Korean scholars. So I think presentation will be given in English, and then discussions in Korean. So if you want to translate into Korean, you will have to use channel 3. And into English, you will have to use channel 4. Okay. So first presentation will be given by Muntaha Abed from Birzeit University. Oh no, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so today I will be presenting a research that I recently finished working on. And this research helped me understand my PhD research more, because I was, I think for the past year, stuck in the what on earth am I doing mood, which I'm pretty sure a lot of us sometimes wake up to feel. So my focus is basically, in my PhD research, my focus is on comparing South Korean and Palestinian student movements and social movements, specifically in the 1980s, where I focus on specifically the role of female students within the movements and how they were able to sustain certain uprisings or certain movements or certain protests. So today I will be talking about how Korean protest culture in general and its tools have shaped and sustained resistance. So starting from the Gwangju uprising all the way to the anti-Yoon protests that recently ended. Okay, so my research is guided by 3 main questions. The first one is how I'm trying to understand how have protest tools historically document and shape resistance. And the second question is, by default, how were women able to, first of all, sustain the uprisings and kind of help redefine protest culture during the 1980s, of course, and today. Thirdly, I'm trying to understand and I'm trying to look at different protest tools and different protest cultures, and I'm trying to see how they evolved specifically in this day and age of the digital era, where everything is digitized, everything is basically shared on social media, and specifically because we are living around a generation that is, we can call them a social media native. So they are doing mostly everything that deals with their private lives or their public lives on social media. All right, so a quick history to begin before I start talking about what's happening today. I just want to quickly pinpoint what happened in Gwangju of 1980. So the Gwangju uprising started in May 1980. First of all, it was a student-led uprising. So students were reacting to the dictatorship regime of Chun Doo-hwan, because of his suppression, because of his limitations on freedom of speech, because of the issues that he was causing and the violations he was causing for students on campus, and because of the continuous martial law declarations, students were revolting and protesting against the regime and its military and its police. Then the Gwangju uprising turned into full mass civilian uprising, where many people, many civilians, hundreds and thousands of civilians from Gwangju city joined in the uprising, and they were fighting alongside the students. But although the Gwangju uprising was brutally suppressed, a lot of students were actually assassinated by the military. A lot of people were persecuted. The 10-day of this uprising remains a very significant moment in South Korean history. It is considered by Korean sociologists to be the uprising that led eventually, or the movement that led to the democratization movement in 1987. And the uprising itself is still very vivid in national memory and national consciousness. All right, so one very interesting concept that emerged and was uniquely was coined specifically for the Gwangju uprising, for what happened, is the absolute community. And the absolute community is basically discussing or trying to describe this one moment in time where there's an actual unity, a radical kind of unity that forms between people, regardless of age, regardless of profession, regardless of gender, regardless of social class. So the absolute community talks about, or kind of tries to look at the way or the reasons when fear ceases to exist, specifically fear of death. The citizens of Gwangju, at a certain point, they stopped fearing death. They just were looking for this radical commitment and this unified commitment to find justice, to find democracy, and to find liberation. How was this kind of manifested in reality, in real life, the absolute community, this concept? During the 10 days when the uprising was happened, people basically, first of all, there was no violence, even though people drove the military and the police outside the city. So the city, the entire city was liberated. But what happened is that there was, amazingly, no violence, no looting. People were not actually doing anything that was out of the ordinary. People were going on about their lives. They were helping each other. They were distributing their skills. They were offering each other their skills and their services. They were distributing food. They were rationing even gasoline. So the absolute community is this moment in time where people all together joined in a very unique and amazing unity where they were only looking for justice and only looking for liberation and nothing else. So another concept or another movement that I want to talk about, which some of the colleagues actually touched on a little bit yesterday, is the Minjung movement, and by extension, it's art, of course. So the Minjung movement, or the term Minjung in itself, means the common, and it refers in the context of South Korea, and specifically in the context of not just Gwangju as a city, but also the Cholla-Namdo, like the entire region. It refers to marginalized communities or marginalized peoples. And historically, if we look at the city of Gwangju or Cholla-Namdo in general, we can see that this specific region was always marginalized against some way or another, unfortunately. So starting from the three kingdoms, from like Baekje, Jilla, Goryeo, it was the Cholla-Namdo people were always going through certain types of marginalization and discrimination all the way until the contemporary governments, unfortunately. So the Minjung movement, although it started, or it had its first traces, let's say, in the 1960s during the Pak Chung-hee era, but it actually was manifested truly in reality as a movement and as art during the Gwangju uprising and during the Chon Do-hwan regime. So the Minjung, let's say the Minjung movement in general and the Minjung art, it kind of took shape in two ways. First of all, in activism, and second of all, in culture and art. So in activism, we were seeing the Minjung movement kind of manifest itself in the fact that people were protesting, people were holding strikes, people were mobilizing, people were coming, specifically students also, were coming with different strategies in order to be able to resist, to mobilize, to always be face-to-face or head-to-head with the army and with the police. But also at the same time, the Minjung art, which is something that I'm very interested in, something that I was able to see kind of come back during the anti-UN protests, at least. So we were seeing the Minjung art kind of represented in different forms. We have murals, we have banners, we have something, the gulgay, which is the hung-up banners, the very long banners that are draped usually over buildings or held by like a massive amount of people. So also we were seeing wood blocks, which are very small or very like small wooden tools where they get carved and then they're submerged in certain types of ink or oil or like certain material, and they're usually used in order, like they're used to be stamped either on fabric, on walls, on doors, and it's a very quick way. All of these were very quick ways in order to be able to shown, be carried, be stamped, and to avoid the police. So basically, if I have a small wood block and I'm stamping it on different places and I'm hiding it, it would be harder for the police to catch me than if I'm carrying a big poster or placard or banner, or I have something that is very visible. So the Minjung art, one of the main important things about the Minjung art is that it was done as an archive and as a testimony. It wasn't done to be put in in a museum or a gallery, it was done in order to inform the citizens, first of all, of the state violence and the state violations. It was done and used in order to inform the citizens of the status quo that is happening. And it was also done in order to kind of sometimes, often actually, to undermine the regime in satirical ways, in humorous and funny ways. So here's an example. This is like Minjong art, and it's used like the tool is the wood blocks, and it's done by artist Hong Song Dam. This series is called Dawn, the Dawn series, and I tried to choose and incorporate as much as possible of his art. It's 49 different wood blocks that he used in order to kind of, I want to say, document the entire, actually before the events that led to the Gwangju uprising and what happened after. So in his art, he depicts, it's a testimony. His art is a testimony, and he depicts a lot of different feelings throughout this art. So he depicts trauma, he depicts loss, he depicts hope, he even depicts collective struggle of people. He looks at or derives a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions, even the absolute community itself. You can see it depicted in Hong's art. And when I talked to him about, I was speaking to him about my PhD research, and also, honestly, because I wanted to get the copyrights to use his work in my research, he said that these prints became leaflets, posters, and flags on the battlefield. They were not made just for Gwangju, but for wherever popular resistance might occur, anytime, anywhere. So, in a nutshell, looking at these wood blocks and thinking about them in the context of Gwangju is something that artist Hong was kind of refusing. Because to him, even coming from my background, somebody who grew up and was raised in Palestine, or somebody who lived in any imperial context, any colonial context, or under any type of dictatorship or under any kind of suppression, would be able to actually look at his art and look at his wood blocks and kind of relate and understand this memory, and sometimes relive it, and unfortunately also sometimes relive this trauma. So for me personally, when I look at this art, I do remember Gwangju, but I also relate to it on a personal level, because I have seen these scenes and I have seen these depictions sometimes in real life and sometimes on my own like local news. So more of his art, which is my favorite wood blocks that he used, in which he depicts women. And I don't know if it's very clear where he depicts women in different, let's say in different places and in different roles during the Gwangju uprising. So one of the things he depicts clearly is women making food and like distributing food, which is something that in social movement theory and in social movements, when we study uprisings as well and revolutions, we're always seeing these underground or these background roles for women. So women are always the ones responsible for making food and distributing that and taking care basically of the well-being of activists and families and protesters and etc. But two other things that are actually like amazing is one, he depicts this woman up on the top, where she's rallying the entire crowd. That's one. And two, she's holding stones. So she's not just rallying the crowd as in she's just like the person who's yelling and you know, mobilizing the crowd verbally. She's also participating obviously in the protest itself and in the resistance itself. And I'm not sure if you can see because of this symbol, but I don't know how I can change it. But anyways, this is a woman actually distributing weapons to the activists. And my favorite part of this wood block specifically is this girl being held, like she's a small girl, she's being held and she's actually saluting the activists, and she's like, it looks that she's very enthusiastic, which kind of gives, first of all, an idea about the absolute community. Everyone was sharing, everyone was participating in their own capacity, regardless, again, of gender, of age, of profession. And the second thing, which is one of the most interesting things that I found in the archives while looking at the Gwangju uprising, which is the fact that yes, women were distributing weapons, but also women were the reason, or they came up with the idea of kind of tricking the police. And when the police were attacking the protesters, women actually came up with the idea of running around and seizing weapons from the police stations. So this kind of reflects on a lot of mobilization and reflects on a lot of cultural and resistance and mobilizing thing that women were doing during the Gwangju uprising. Okay. So we are fast forwarding to today. So since 2022, the Yoon's government in general, we're facing mass protests by civilians, by everyone, and there were a variety of reasons for why these mass protests why these mass protests were happening. So the first thing is because of corruption, a lot of specific incidents happened in starting from 2022 until 2024, from the Itaewon tragedy to the corruption of Yoon and his government and his wife, and so all of these we already know. And of course, again, the cherry on top where he decided to smartly declare martial law. And this specific moment revived in even people who did not witness Gwangju, people who were even politically inactive. They did not care about politics whatsoever. They heard about the Gwangju uprising, they heard about martial law. So these people the trauma was revived in their psyche, in their mindset, because even if they did not experience the Gwangju uprising or the martial law personally, they heard about it from their parents, from their grandparents. So a lot of people started, even those who were, again, not interested in politics at all, started actually protesting against the Yoon government. So I'm gonna quickly talk about the fact that, one thing is Gwangju was, or we could see that Gwangju was symbolically and tactically kind of revived starting from 2024. And two kind of new phenomena stood out that were different from the way people were protesting during the Gwangju era, which are K-pop and digital resistance. So the use of K-pop, and specifically the use of K-pop light sticks as part of the protest culture, was something that to me was very striking, because light sticks usually refer to fun times, it's a concert merch, it's something that people use in order to have fun. But then we started seeing young women in their 20s and 30s holding light sticks and decorating light sticks with words like pamyon or like sakyon sokyol, so they were using like a fun merch in a very political way. And that, in a sense, first of all, brought unity and brought safety to the atmosphere of the protest site. And at the same time, it became accessible. It became a signifier that this space is accessible for the younger generation. And again, specifically people who were not interested in politics in any way, they had light sticks. They were seeing young women with light sticks and with like K-pop songs, marching and using political chants and like mixing them with K-pop songs. And that became something in which people were like, okay, yeah, you know what? I can actually be part of this place. And digital resistance is a whole other thing, but I just want to talk about this because I specifically, I was really happy that this is a movie poster where Chon Do-hwan's face was replaced by Yoon's face. And this became a viral meme, but then at the same time, people started printing the poster out, and specifically young women, and they were marching with this poster in the rallies, specifically around Gwanghwamun Palace. So the digital resistance actually manifested itself as a different type of protest tool and protest culture. Okay. This is again, so with the new protest culture and protest tools that emerged, I just want to talk about the fact that still older protest tools remain. So we were still seeing the gulgay, for example, the hung up banner, and we were still seeing people sharing food. And this is something I talked about in the absolute community. And then because people were sharing food very like casually. They were making food in their kitchens, in communal spaces. But now it's not really feasible to make food and in your kitchen and give it to protesters. So what happened is that people started buying food like in bulk, buying coffees and teas, and just publishing on their social media that you can go get 100 cups of coffee from this place, or 100 cups of tea from this place, or snacks, or etc. So even the idea of food sharing came back in a digitized way, but it came back from the Gwangju uprising. The last thing I want to talk about is the satire flag, the use of satire again. And this is actually really, really funny and very witty by young protesters, because, for example, one of the flags says the stay-at-home coalition, like, just please let me lie down, like, I don't want to do anything. One says, until when do we have to do that? Or like something. So basically, it's just using satire and using jokes all the time. And the reason this is being done is not just to show disinterest. It's this actually became a huge trend called the anything flag, where people during the Gwangju uprising, people were actually accused of being North Korean spies or communists. During the Park Geun-hye era, activists were being, accused as having like different agendas and etc. So people actually started coming with these flags in order to show, to show the government that, yes, I'm making an effort to be here, and I'm showing you also, I'm ridiculing you, I'm making fun of you, but I'm also showing you that I'm not here because of an agenda. I'm here because I'm done with you, with what you're doing as a government. And so the last thing I want to say to wrap up, and we can talk about this in the discussion, but the last thing I want to say is actually that what I can see until now is that the South Korean protest culture is continuously evolving, but at the same time, it's very rooted in history, and we can see how rooted it is, specifically after the declaration of martial law, how rooted it is in the Gwangju uprising. And one thing I just want to say is the fact that each and every tool or culture that I have just mentioned continues to grow, continues to evolve until today, even after the protests, the official anti-UN protests are done. And then each and every one of these tools can be studied on its own, and it can have like its own research, because it's very deep and it's very complex. So for now, this is a snapshot in time for what I saw and what I observed on the street during the anti-UN protests. And thank you.
Let us invite Seon Gang from Seoul National University. So she will discuss her paper in Korean, and after this we'll have another paper, and then we will have open discussion with all the floor invited. Okay.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 한국어로 토론을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 일단 너무 흥미로운 주제의 발표를 잘 들었습니다. 여기 계신 분들 중에 많이들 알고 계시겠지만, 이제 한강 작가의 그 노벨상 수상문에서 굉장히 유명한 이제 문구가 화제가 됐었잖아요. 그러니까 과거가 현재를 도울 수 있는가, 죽은 자가 이제 산자를 구할 수 있는가라는 발언이 현 사회에서 계속해서 한국 사회에서 화제가 되었었는데, 이 주제가 딱 그 화제가 되고 있는 굉장히 시의적절한 이제 주제를 이 발표자가 다루고 있다라는 생각이 듭니다. 광주 항쟁의 존재가 발표자가 잘 이야기하였듯이 이제 12월 3일 계엄 이후에서 이제 계속해서 한국 사회에 이제 경종을 울리면서 어떤 역사적인 기억을 이제 소환해 왔는데, 이런 현 위치를 좀 잘 보여주고 있는 그런 중요한 발표 주제가 아니었는가라고 생각을 합니다. 특히 이제 발표자는 이제 광주 항쟁 그리고 그 유산이 최근에 어떤 그 퇴진 집회에서 남긴 역사적 유산과 영향에 대해서 민중문화, 그러니까 민중미술이라고 하는 키워드, 그리고 이제 여성의 역할이라고 하는 이제 두 가지 키워드를 가지고 논지를 전개를 하고 있습니다. 굉장히 흥미로운 주제일 뿐만 아니라 이제 광주 항쟁과 현 사회, 한국 사회의 어떤 연결점을 이제 살펴볼 때 한국의 어떤 민주화 운동의 역사를 이해하는 데도 중요한 지점들을 짚고 있다는 생각이 들고, 특히 그 문화적인 상징물에 좀 주목을 한다라는 점에서 현 이제 집회 문화의 어떤 정동들, 감정들을 좀 건드리고 있다라는 데에서 이 접근이 좀 의의가 크다라는 이제 생각이 듭니다. 이제 그럼에도 불구하고 이제 발표를 들으면서 저 또한 이 집회에 많이 이제 참여를 했던 사람으로서 이 들었던 몇 가지 이제 질문들과 이제 좀 발표자에게 조금 더 의견을 이제 묻고 싶은 것들을 좀 생각을 해 보았는데요. 일단 왜 광주 항쟁이었는가에 대한 발표자의 추가적인 좀 의견을 좀 묻고 싶습니다. 이 광주 항쟁이 물론 발표에서 계속해서 나왔듯이 한국 민주화 운동에서 굉장히 중요한 기점이자 사건이었습니다. 그래서 일련의 이제 이 계엄 이후에 어떤 사태에서 이 시위에 나가는 그 시민들에게는 이러한 기억들이 어떻게 재소환이 되고 그 시위에 기꺼이 나가게 되는 그런 이제 계기를 이제 제공을 하게 되었는데요. 이제 그럼에도 불구하고 이 발표문에서 다루고 있는 이제 주요한 키워드, 특히 이제 홍성담의 이제 민중미술, 그러니까 걸개 그림이나 어떤 판화, 이 그림, 그리고 현재 집회에서 등장하고 있는 어떤 암흑이빨, 그러니까 같은 그런 이제 두 가지 어떤 이제 키워드들을 좀 단순하게 비교하고 있지 않은가라는 생각이 듭니다. 그러니까 이 단순한 비교가 아니라 이제 두 가지 역사적 사건을 연결 지을 때 그 당시의 어떤 이제 역사적인 맥락들을 조금 더 섬세하게 풀어낼 수 있다면 좋겠다라는 생각이 들었는데요. 이 죄송합니다. 네, 이러한 민중 미술이나, 그러니까 광주에서 사용되었던 어떤 이제 뭐 걸개 그림이라든가 어떤 광주에서 사용되었던 아젠다가 현 집회에서 이렇게 재등장한 측면들이 분명히 있습니다만 그 재등장했던 그 계기나 배경들은 현 시대적 과제 속에서는 다른 맥락에서 사실은 불러올 수 있다라는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 이러한 좀 다른 역사적인 맥락들을 어떻게 좀 섬세하게 짚어낼 수 있을까가 발표자가 이제 가지고 계신 연구 주제를 좀 더 발전시킬 수 있는 좀 중요한 일이지 않을까라는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 사실은 저는 그 암흑이빨이 나타나게 된 맥락에 대해서 조금 더 설명을 드리고 싶었는데 사실 발표에서 그 내용이 이미 나와서 그 부분은 좀 넘어가고 저는 이제 이번 집회에서 그 임을 위한 행진곡 같은 그 민중가요가 불린 것도 굉장히 좀 중요하고 재밌는 일이라는 생각이 들었거든요. 그러니까 이게 광주항쟁의 기억이 재소환되는 데는 좀 핵심적인 사례이면서도 그 임을 위한 행진곡이 현 집회에서 다시 불릴 때 어떤 시대적 과제나 그 사람들이 느끼는 어떤 정동들이나 이런 것들은 그 광주항쟁에서의 기억들과는 또 다른 맥락이었을 것이라는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 이런 이제 경험들이 어떤 식으로 좀 층위를 가지고 나올 수 있는가에 대한 좀 발표자가 추가적인 설명을 해줄 수 있다면 좋을 것 같고, 그럼에도 불구하고 이제 전 사회적으로 소환될 수 있는 광주의 어떤 보편적인 역사적 유산에 대해서도 발표 중간에 잠깐 언급을 해주신 것 같지만 그런 부분들이 이제 있다고 생각하시면 그게 무엇인지 좀 여쭙고 싶습니다. 두 번째로는 이제 그 여성의 역할과 관련된 부분인데요. 이건 이제 발표자는 이제 절대 공동체라고 하는 그 최정훈의 이제 5월의 사회과학에 등장하는 어떤 사회과학적인 개념을 가지고 와서 이 광주에서의 그 여성들의 역할을 설명하기 위한 어떤 개념으로서 사용을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 이 절대 공동체가 사실 그 광주항쟁 당시에 그 발표에서도 언급이 됐지만 뭐 젠더라든가 아니면 뭐 계급이라든가 직업이라든가 이런 거에 상관없이 그 시민들이 자발적으로 그 공동체에서 서로를 돕고 이제 공감할 수 있었던 어떤 일종의 초월적인 경험이 가능했던 그런 이제 개념으로 알고 있는데요. 그렇다면 현 집회에서 이 절대 공동체 개념을 이제 다시금 한번 적용을 시켜 본다면 현 한국 사회에서의 그 최근에 1년 집회 과정에서 이제 그 공동체의 역할이라든가 아니면 이제 이런 이제 신뢰할 수 있는 만한 이제 공동체 개념을 이제 적용을 한다면 어떤 식으로 좀 생각해 볼 수 있을 것인가에 대해서 좀 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 특히 이제 발표자가 언급하고 있는 그 여성의 역할이라고 하는 것이 그 공동체, 그러니까 서로를 믿을 수 있고 신뢰할 수 있고 안전한 공동체를 만들고 하는 것들은 저는 이제 일종의 젠더화된 역량일 수 있겠다는 생각이 들거든요. 그러니까 이 광주 항쟁에서 이제 뭐 나눔 문화가 있고 이제 서로를 돕고 이런 것들, 그리고 이제 왜 그런 이야기들 많이 나오잖아요. 그러니까 막 주먹밥 싸와서 이제 나눠주고 막 이런 것들, 그러니까 서로를 기꺼이 도울 수 있는 그런 마음들이 그 발표에서도 언급됐지만 이번 집회에서 그 2030 여성들이라고 하는 중요한 주체가 이제 등장을 하게 되는데 그 여성들이 그 현 집회에서 가지고 있는 그 공동체에서의 역할들을 단순히 뭔가 모두가 중립적인 위치에서 서로를 도왔다라기보다는 젠더화된 어떤 역할로서 또는 여성의 역할로서 이거를 바라볼 수는 없는 것인지 이 부분에 대한 좀 발표자의 추가적인 의견을 좀 여쭙고 싶습니다. 그리고 마지막으로는 이제 그 발표자의 어떤 문제의식과 관련해서 저는 사실 그 최근 집회에서의 그 남태령 시위를 좀 언급을 하고 싶은데, 그러니까 발표자의 문제의식을 좀 적용하기 굉장히 좀 좋은 사례이지 않을까라는 생각이 들었어요. 그러니까 그 윤석열 퇴치 집회의 어떤 여러 역사적인 기점들 가운데서도 이 밤샘 시위에서 발표자가 중요하게 생각하는 어떤 이제 민중 문화의 어떤 재등장, 80년대 민중 문화의 재등장, 그리고 세대가 교차한 어떤 시위 문화, 그리고 이제 여성의 역할, 그리고 사실 절대 공동체 개념을 감히 이제 적용할 수 있을 법한 어떤 초월적인 경험들이 나올 수 있었던 국면이고, 또 여기서 이제 발표에서는 좀 빠르게 넘어가긴 했지만 어떤 교차성 페미니즘, 그리고 성소수자의 역할, 네, SNS를 통한 연대 등이 나왔던 그 퇴진 집회 문화의 어떤 원형이 될 수 있을 만한 이제 기점이라는 생각이 들어서 이런 부분과 이제 광주 항쟁의 어떤 역사적인 연관성을 좀 생각해 볼 수 있지 않을까라는 생각에서 좀 조심스럽게 제언해 드리면서 토론을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 중간에 전화가 울린 점은 정말 죄송합니다.
Okay. She asked 5 minutes, but obviously she spoke more. But that was a great discussion. Munta, any brief response?
Okay, so first of all, why Gwangju is a very long answer. So I'm just gonna keep it at the point that Gwangju is one of the most uprisings that have inspired me since I was a child, and I decided to work on it because it deeply resonates with the way the Palestinian history also functions. So if I look at, like, one of the things I just want to touch on is the fact that there's, yes, sometimes a lot of the times I struggle with, okay, am I finding similarities, or am I just like coming up with, like, trying, kind of inventing stuff? But at the same time, for the banners and the slogans, and this is something I skipped during the presentation, is the fact that when I was looking at the Gulgay itself, yes, it makes a comeback. During the Pak Geun Hye era, it made a comeback in every single social movement. But the slogans after the declaration of the martial law, that was the very kind of significant moment to me. Because during the Gwangju uprising, and before that, people were talking about democracy grows by drinking our blood. And then suddenly, after the declaration of Yoon's martial law, again, people were using the same terminology. They were using the words democracy, they were using the words blood. They were saying, we protected this square with our blood, we protected democracy with our blood. So there was the same kind of terminology coming back. And that kind of drew my attention to, how am I using these words? On what tools am I using these words? So that's when I kind of started understanding, oh yeah, okay, so certain slogans go on banners, and certain slogans go on kulgays, and certain slogans are like better for stenciled posters or wood blocks. So that's kind of where I started noticing these things. And also, thank you so much for the comment on the, like, overnight sit-ins. That is, to me, a very interesting phenomena, but also requires a whole different research because, again, as you said, it's intersectional feminisms, it's also the LGBTQ community, it's a lot of different, it's a very complex layer. So to me, for this specific research, I was trying so hard to focus, okay, let's focus on tools, let's just not run around. But this is actually something I am considering working on, and I'm already in, like, interviews with people. Yeah, I'm talking to activists who I met, like, randomly during the rallies because I participated in the last month. And so I'm talking to people now, and I'm trying to kind of navigate my way in order to be as inclusive as possible, because it's different, different age groups, different sexual orientations. It's a lot of different groups that were specifically part of the sit-in and part of the camping campaign against Yoon. So still in progress, but I promise I will let you know what happened. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And next presenter, Trunika Roy from Jawaharlal Nehru University will give a talk about the birth control issue and its legacy.
Good morning, everyone. I am Torunika, and I'm a PhD scholar pursuing my PhD in Korean Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is in New Delhi. And I'm also a research assistant working for Korea Chair, which is newly launched in this think tank called Council for Strategic and Defense Research in New Delhi. And today I'm going to talk about the legacy of population control and how Cold War politics shaped South Korea's fertility crisis. So after World War II, the population control debate became a hot topic, especially among Western and European scholars, and it was linked to the central global health policy. Modern contraceptive technologies such as birth controls, IUDs, they were often developed and promoted by the United Nations and United States, not nation states, and was seen as key to economic growth and political stability, especially in developing countries like South Korea, Taiwan, India, Pakistan, and Chile. However, while these initiatives rapidly reduced fertility rates and supported economic development, they also had significant repercussions, especially on women's health and autonomy and reproductive freedom. So in today's presentation, I would be discussing how did American contraceptive technology influence women's reproductive health and in South Korea during the Cold War. So, very brief Cold War context. Like as we all know, there was an ideological rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union, which sharply influenced the Korean Peninsula. And after the Korean War, it devastated the South, crippling its economy and infrastructure. Facing both poverty and perceived threat of communism by its leaders, the South Korean leaders, under American guidance, adopted population control as a core nation-building strategy. So, talking about American influence and global population control, the United States played a very important and critical role in shaping South Korea's population policy. So, David P. Fields, he is an author of this book called Foreign Friends, Shingman Ri, American Exceptionalism and the Division of Korea. He argued that Ri's closeness with the USA turned South Korea into a test case for American exceptionalism during Cold War. And the US-led agencies collaborated with South Korea's local institutions for implementing birth control programs for decreasing its population growth. Agencies and organizations like Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, and Population Council provided not only funding but also technical expertise and policy blueprints to the decision-making authorities in South Korea. And authors like Matthew Connelly and Anju Cho, they have argued that these collaborations were not really neutral. American policymakers framed population control as necessary to contain communism and enable economic growth. US trained doctors, Korean doctors, they became mediators and localized these global campaigns with little regard to women's experience and agency. And policymaking and technology were described mostly as gender blind, with male technocrats dismissing the side effects of contraceptives and sterilization on women's bodies. So, I have tried to put my research into the framework of balance of power and biopolitics. So, balance of power forms one of the core ideologies of realism, and under this, just a minute. Yeah, the US's interest in reducing population growth in South Korea was linked to preventing the spread of communism. The second concept that I've used is biopolitics by Michel Foucault, which means the management of populations through birth control, census taking, and health programs becoming tool of state power. And in Korea, this meant planning was not just about health, it was a national security imperative justified by Cold War fears and economic rationality. And even before reaching to Korea, such intellectual discourse were popular among European and American scholars, as I mentioned previously. For example, English scholar Thomas Malthus, he argued that population explosion would lead to shortage of food supply and lead to poverty. And also, psychologist C.P. Blacker, he was worried in his readings that population of Asia and Russia may form a solid bloc to shake off the yoke of the Western world and America. The West even concluded that birth control was indispensable to avoid another war between the East and the West. So, talking about the American contraceptive technology, at a conference in 1952 funded by Rockefeller Foundation, a few American scholars and researchers, they evinced that population trends might threaten not merely the United States but all the Western civilization. And hence, they backed the founding of Population Council, which was funded by the Rockefeller and Ford Foundation. And they created fellowships and research centers in countries like India, and they trained people from poorer countries and also encouraged research on contraceptives and techniques on birth controls like IUDs and Lippies loop with Margulies. And in 1952, International Planned Parenthood Federation was also formed to closely work and advise countries like India, Pakistan on population control policies. And South Korea later tried to follow the path of these countries in implementing its own population control policies. Eventually, in 1958, US President Eisenhower discussed the problems of underdeveloped countries and warned the National Security Council of exploding population growth. In reality, America was worried that overpopulation and poverty in newly decolonized countries can actually push those colonized countries, decolonized country to adopt communism. In 1960, South Korea established the Family Planning Program, FPP, under the leadership of President Park Chung-hee. And in 1965, the Planned Parenthood Federation of Korea was also formed to do the similar activities. However, the FPP was led by mainly male doctors and bureaucrats who attended universities in the US, and neither doctors or government took seriously the side effects of contraceptive technology on women's bodies. The Korean technocrats collaborated with foreign advisors from Western developed nations to design, monitor, and evaluate experimental research. South Korean collaborators of FPP acted as mediators who localized the global campaign for population control through interaction with the West. And again, as I mentioned previously, these initiatives were highly gender blind, and FPP turned out to be interventionist due to reckless distribution of its contraceptive methods. Moreover, women were completely excluded and alienated from such processes of fertility reduction, of policy making, implementation, and evaluation. And this program was heavily criticized for using coercive features, especially regarding the treatment of women's bodies, and was also said to be a stark example of state intervention in family and women's bodies. Also, to give you an example, in 1960, Lippies loop and pills and tubal litigation for women in the 1970s were heavily used rather than safer practices such as condoms or rhythm methods. Also, the Lippies loop was at the first stage of experimentation in the United States, but still the Korean government was distributing it in Korea. So, talking about state-led family planning in modern Korea, family planning was rapidly institutionalized by the military government in the 1960s. It became central to Korea's 5-year economic plan. And the implementation was aggressive and hierarchical. There were mass campaigns through TV, radios, and there were heavy efforts by the government to shift the attitudes of contraception, because this used to be a taboo or unfamiliar concept among women in those days. The state also mobilized health vans, local clinics, even the Marine Corps to reach remote population. As you can see in this poster also, I don't know if you can. There were posters which said, don't discriminate between boys and girls, have only 2 children, raise them well. So as there are more very interesting posters which can have more research on it, and these posters were encouraging couples to have only 1 or 2 children. So women's roles, agency and surveillance. In this entire initiative, women also played the role of both subjects and enforcers of policy. Women's clubs and mothers association grew to tens to thousands, reaching nearly 750,000 members by mid-1970s. And they were also required to keep records of their pregnancies, contraceptive use, which institutionalized surveillance over the reproductive lives. Lastly, I would like to talk about the implications of these contraceptive technology for women's health. So the state preferred methods such as Lippis loop, IUD, and tubal litigation, which were widely promoted even when side effects were known and reported as early as the 1960s in the USA. The women also experience cramping, irregular bleeding, pelvic inflammatory disease, PID, infections and iron deficiency due to heavy menstrual blood loss. And scholars, and as usual, as I mentioned previously, these were heavily dismissed by the policymakers and even the doctors. So authors like Anju Cho, they have actually labeled this era as a hyper-masculinist regime where women were mobilized as family planning foot soldiers but denied a meaningful voice in shaping policy. So in 1966, Korea inserted about 400,000 loops. However, Korea also faced on and reported high removal rate of loops, which compelled the experts and male doctors to make sure that women do not remove the loops. It was mentioned in the report by Population Council that experts agreed that if women got necessary assurance, they would tolerate minor side effects and not demand to have the loop removed. The doctors were trained to inform women that minor side effects were not a reason for removal, and even most pelvic infections could effectively treated with loop in place. And they were also instructed to prescribe or offer a few aspirins in case the women complain of any discomfort. As I mentioned earlier, there were more problems such as risk of iron deficiency, cramping and discomfort, irregular bleeding, painful periods, expulsion of IUD from uterus, infection. Yet the male doctors agreed that such minor issues were not sufficient for the removal of IUD. So, in conclusion, the Cold War era in South Korea was marked by intense demographic intervention, justified by both economic development and anti-communist strategy. US-backed population control programs were successful in reducing the national birth rate, but they also resulted in profound and sometimes harmful impact on women's health and autonomy. And although it is still very early to establish a very direct link and maybe a little bit controversial to directly link this issue with Korea's current fertility rate, but when under this population control policies, South Korea's fertility rate dropped below the replacement level of 2.1 in 1983, but the government continued such policies even till 2005, when South Korea's total fertility rate dropped to 1.08, and at that time it was the first time when South Korea became the country having lowest fertility rates in the world. Still, the government continued this. This decline was influenced by government's strong fertility regulation policy and the widespread use of contraception and a shift towards smaller families, which again becomes very hard to change when you start establishing such norms. These histories reveal the lasting cost of gender-blind policies and need to critically examine the biopolitics of population control for their social and political consequences, and not just the demographic results. Thank you for listening.
Okay, great time management. Perhaps you can maybe stay while he's giving discussion. So Professor Han Bong-seok will discuss the paper.
예, 토론을 맡은 한봉석입니다. 예, 잘 들었습니다. 예. 예, 저도 록펠러 재단의 그 가족계획 사업에 관심이 있어서 연구를 계속 중입니다만 이 문제를 남성이 접근한다는 것 자체의 한계는 조금 계속 느끼고 있습니다. 그래서 이번 발표가 냉전 시기의 여성의 몸, 특히 피임 문제에 대해서 다루고 있다라는 점, 그리고 인도는 사실 파키스탄과 더불어 그 미국의 저개발국 인구 정책이 가장 직접적으로 이제 수행되었던 곳입니다. 결과가 달랐던 것이 그 차이지, 인도와 파키스탄에서 사용되었던 피임 도구들, 그리고 그 계획이 그대로 일본과 한국에 적용되었고, 특히 파키스탄의 경우는 한국에서 크게 모범을 삼던 1960년대 초반에도 계속해서 이제 사람들을 보내고 같은 피임 기구를 쓰고 뭐 그랬었습니다. 그런 면에서 이 냉전 시기, 제가 이걸 돌릴 수는 없군요. 그래서 냉전 시기, 제가 발표자도 아닌데 시간을 잡아먹네요. 네. 그래서 그 발표자가 해주신 거는 결국은 이 가족계획 사업이 어떻게 한국에 저출산에 영향을 끼쳤는가라는 것이었고, 그리고 요 각각 이제 피임 기술들, 특히 여성의 몸을 혹사하는 이런 방식들이 무계획적으로 들어왔었다라는 것이고, 그걸 보여줌으로 인해서 예. 죄송합니다. 최신 기술인 줄 알고. 그래서 주로 하시는 것이 옅은 여성의 몸에 대해서 주목을 한 거였습니다. 그래서 저의 질문은 이거였습니다. 저한테 10분밖에 없기 때문에 왜 한국일까? 라는 생각이 좀 들었습니다. 두 나라의 비교가 있을 수도 있고 그렇긴 한데 왜 한국일까라는 더군다나 한국의 산하 제한 계획과 오늘날의 저출산이 직접적으로 연결되는가라는 의문도 최근에 나오고 있기 때문에 한국을 선택한 이유가 첫 번째 궁금했습니다. 두 번째는 저는 미국도 중요하지만 한국의 가족계획 사업에 개입했던 주체가 시기별로 달랐습니다. 그러니까 이 생체 정치의 주도권이 1960년대 초반에는 록펠러 재단이라는 민간 재단이 주도했습니다. 미국 정부는, 미국의 USAID는 종교적 문제, 그리고 성적 자유 결정권 등등의 문제 때문에 이 피임 문제를 한국에서 원조기관이 수행하는 걸 주저했습니다. 그래서 60에서 68년 사이 민간재단이 미국 정부와 그리고 한국 정부의 통제권을 모두 벗어나서 한국의 지역 공동체로 들어가 자유로운 실험을 하는 것이 가능했습니다. 록펠러는 따로 사절단을 보냈고 월별 보고서를 작성했으며, 그리고 당시 한국에 아직 인구 통계가 부재할 때 생명표를 작성했습니다. 뭐 출생률, 사망률 이런 것들이 포함되어 있는. 한국은 사실은 통계가 없는 상태에서 이 사업에 들어갔던 것이기 때문에 이것을 미국이라고 봤을 때는 조금 추상적인 측면이 있고, 그래서 록펠러 재단의 역할과 인구협회의 역할이 조금 더 주목되어야 하지 않는가라는 게 좀 저의 그 관심사였습니다. 두 번째는 이 냉전하의 가족계획 사업에서 이 냉전 체제의 핵심이 반공주의에 있는 것인지 아니면은 발전주의를 유지하는 것에 있는지가 최근 저의 고민이었습니다. 반공주의는 디폴트 값이긴 한데 한국의 모든 연구가 오랫동안 반공주의를 중심으로 냉전 체제를 인식하고자 했습니다. 근데 지나고 보니 반공보다는 발전이라는 이 밀키트를 어떻게 잘 판매하고 1세기의 그 규정력이 유지되는 한 제3세계가 거기에 복무하고 제3세계의 유리천장을 만들어 놓고 이것이 지속가능한 세계를 유지하는 것, 서스테이너블 디벨롭먼트가 유지되는 것이 어쩌면 냉전 정책이 아니었을까. 특히 인구 정책은 저개발국 일반에 대한 서구의 공포, 19세기, 20세기 1970년대, 80년대 인구 폭탄이 터져 모두 다 죽을 것이다. 그리고 우생학적으로 다소 열등한 저개발국의 인구가 이렇게까지 늘어나는 것은 적절하지 않다. 라는 것을 반공주의라는 이름으로 진행했다가 나중에 록펠러가 인도주의라는 이름으로 전환시켰기 때문에 반공주의는 분명 중요한 요소이지만 발전주의를 조금 더 포커스를 둬야 되지 않는가라는 생각이 조금 더 들었습니다. 그리고 저는 이게 정말 중요하다고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면 이거는 커피벨트와 비슷하지만 저는 잉여농산물을 연구하는 연구자이기도 한데 공통적으로 제가 발견하게 된 것은 냉전 체제 하의 키는 저개발국 출산 경험이 있는 농촌의 여성이었습니다. 그러니까 우리가 주로 큰 원조만 보지만 사실 이 미국의 잉여농산물이 지역에 들어가는 경로와 타겟은 두 가지. 인구 통제 그리고 영양 교육인데 이때 가장 핵심이 되는 타겟은 출산 경험이 있는 농촌 여성입니다. 그리고 이것이 실패했을 때, 미국의 정책이 실패했을 때 책임 소재로 가장 먼저 희생되는 것도 출산 경험이 있는 농촌 여성입니다. 그래서 사실 이 밀키트는 이들 농촌, 출산 경험이 있는 농촌 여성의 절대적인 희생에 의해 가능했던 것이고 이것이 비가시화된 측면이 있다. 그래서 이것을 여성이라고만 한정했을 때 추상적인 면이 있다. 라는 생각입니다. 실제로 한국의 경우에도 초기 타겟은 분명하게 출산 경험이 있는 농촌 여성입니다. 그 다섯 번째는 저는 이 피임기구, 제가 옛날에 피임기구의 종류를 잘 몰라서 엄청 망신을 당한 적이 있지만 죄송합니다. 여튼 이 피임기구 각각이 지니는 냉전 정치성이 있습니다. 리페스 루프는 특허권이 록펠러에 있습니다. 그리고 이 리페스 루프는 각 나라별로 계약서를 작성하는데 들어갈 때 지역 문화와 충돌하는 부분이 있으면 그것의 변경을 요구합니다. 그리고 68년 그리고 이게 우리나라에 들어왔을 때 우리가 이제 시제품을 가져왔다는 것도 알고 있고 근데 결과적으로 무엇이냐라고 하면 실패했습니다. 왜냐하면 이 전체 통계를 보면 아시아의 많은 나라들은 리페스 루프를 미국에서 생산된 것을 가져다 씁니다. 60년대 내내. 근데 한국은 초창기를 제외하고는 자체 생산을 합니다. 근데 이 이제 한국에 다른 연구가 나와서 알게 되었는데 이 탄성지수 때문에 의료적인 전문가 개입 없이 이것을 그냥 카피했을 경우에 리페스 루프의 성능은 확연하게 떨어지게 됩니다. 나중에 최근의 연구들이 사실은 크게 주장하지 못하지만 죄송합니다. 사실 한국 출산율 저하의 큰 요소는 낙태였다라는 이야기입니다. 그리고 사실 스위스에서 나왔던 구두 피임약도 마찬가지인 거죠. 그래서 이 각각의 피임기구에 대한 권력이 오늘 이해가 많이 안 된 것 같아서 그걸 조금 더 이야기를 듣고 싶습니다. 그리고 여섯 번째는 마지막으로는 그럼에도 불구하고 한국의 가족계획 사업은 얼마만큼 오늘날의 저출산 관련이 있는가. 한국인들은 아이러니지만 베네치아 공화국 말기와 똑같습니다. 국가가 가장 융성하지만 문화적으로 번성하지만 누구도 행복하지 않는 나는 불행하다로 10,000명과 1,000명이 이야기할 수 있는 그래서 이게 한국 연구자들 입장에서 너무 아이러니입니다. 우리가 멸망할 때 우리를 발견한 그래서 이 출산율 저하도 그런 측면이 좀 있다라는 생각이 좀 있었습니다. 예, 말이 길었습니다. 이상입니다.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the comments. I think it has supplemented to my research. Actually, I think you want to know why the Korean case in particular, and to be honest, it has to do a lot regarding my own personal reasons. So I'm up since I am a PhD scholar. My thesis is related to low fertility rates in South Korea, and also I did my undergrad in Iwa Yojate Akkyo for about 4 years. and at that time I came across, because we all know EVA is like a very it has given platform to women to participate in a lot of movements and speak about themselves. I got interacted with a lot of women, and it inspired both my PhD and my research articles. And last year, when there was martial law, I was also in Korea for my field research. And during that time, I talked to a few professors, and they helped me discover this topic. And also, I had some interviews which actually got my interest in this, in this on this subject. And why Korea in particular? When I was working as a research assistant in this different think tank called Institute of Chinese Studies, we actually came up with a plan to write a monograph on Korea, Taiwan, and India, how their population control policies worked, and what was the problems, what lessons we learned. So that's why I was working on the Korea section. Even being an Indian, I am more interested in Korea than researching on India. And those are my personal reasons. And secondly, when I was also doing my background research for this topic, even though India and Pakistan, they started this program prior to Korea, I don't think it was that successful. No, I cannot vouch for Pakistan, but in India it was not really successful, because we already had a lot of political upheaval going on. Mrs. Indira Gandhi was there, and a lot of emergency was there. His son Sanjay Gandhi, who was not even in an official position, he was handling all these population control policies. And US, I actually came up with this article which says that US tried to threaten Mrs. Gandhi to implement this population control policy, and if they didn't, they would restrict some kind of aid. But it actually failed, because of, again, people were protesting it. And a lot of, India is a very diverse country, so it's not very easy to just go and just implement any kind of policy. You have to think about a lot of religion, regional culture, so it impacts a lot. So at that time, Korea happened to be, and I also read in a lot of research papers that even there's a report by Population Council which states that Korea is the most successful case of having these population control policies implemented. That's why I chose to focus on Korea. And although I'm open to research on these kind of comparative research on India, Korea. And I just wanted to respond to this anti-communism and developmentalism. Thank you so much for uh, actually expanding this and also helping me to comprehend the anti-communism and developmentalism. What I read, I think anti-communism maybe from US's perspective, it was more like an anti-communism, especially when they saw these countries following the Soviet Union more closely. For example, India was not. India didn't take any side under Cold War. We were mostly like the non-aligned country, but still we were labeled as communist. And even Shingmanri didn't like India. So because of that trust issue and gap, India and South Korea couldn't even establish democratic relations till 1973. So I think maybe I should do more research on this. But I think countries like India, Pakistan, not Pakistan but India, and like a lot of South Asian region, they were following the Soviet Union, and that's why the US had this thing in their mind that maybe it will be a problematic thing in future if a lot of people start following anti-communism. But in Korea state, I agree that it can come under the concept of state developmentalism, because these four tigers that we hear, Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, yeah, there's one more, Hong Kong, yeah. Hong Kong, they all have this state developmentalism and chaebols. And so I completely agree in this, and I will try to do more research on this to have a clarity. Thank you so much.
Thank you for wonderful discussion. Now it's time to invite all presenters and discussants and take questions from the floor. I think.
Thank you so much. My question is to Torika about your research. First of all, I'd like to understand a little bit better what is your discipline. Is it historical? Is it feminist? Is it like multidisciplinary? What is your specific perspective, like your unique perspective? Because I see a lot of mixes of perspectives here, and I felt like I had missed some theory. Maybe it's a suggestion for you to look into a theory that's called reproductive injustice, and it's really strong right now in the reproductive. Thank you. Sorry, my English is not my first language. It's not okay. It's fine. I think everyone hears it. So, reproductive injustice is one of the main frameworks to reproductive studies in US right now. And I think it can really help you to develop your conclusions even more, because it touches topics of injustice regarding reproduction and maybe discrimination between certain groups. So, as Mr. Han said, when the implementation in the Cold War was happening with the population policies, this discrimination can be related to this kind of theory. So I think it will help you a lot. And right next to it, there's another theory that is called epistemic injustice, which is the injustice in the knowledge production and the knowledge rights of women on their bodies. And I didn't understand your methodology really well, because I did hear you did some interviews, maybe field work. It will be really interesting if you do interviews with women that lived in that era. What did they feel about their bodily experience regarding these policies? And I did, as a, I would say that, full disclosure, I'm a demography student, so I felt a missing theory of the, how do you say, fertility, I forgot it in English, transition. Okay, so we have population transition. Where's the theory of fertility transition? Because it's not just a local issue, it's a global issue, and each country experiences in a different way. And this will connect you with the current state of the South Korean fertility. So this is overall. Thank you so much. It was really interesting, and yeah.
Thank you so much for the comments. I come from IR background. For my undergrad, I did my bachelor's in East Asian Studies from EVA, but for my master's, it was IR and area studies. So I'm pursuing my PhD in Korean studies from India. But as you correctly mentioned, for this paper, I try to take like an historical approach combined with women's studies. Like I do not come from women's studies. It was not my background. But yeah, thank you so much for these theories. Although I did use my fertility transition in my PhD thesis, and I took a part, so I'm sorry I couldn't bring that out in a very well manner, but I would thank you so much for recommending these epistemic injustice and reproductive injustice, right? So I'll surely look into this. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Shohan. I'm from India as well. So I had a similar question as made by Dr. Han, like about US's interest in decreasing population in Korea, like being linked to the spread of communism, like this fear of spread of communism, the South Korean state making in the initial year, especially under Lee presidency, like was very aggressively successful in countering communism domestically, and like US and the United Nations forces in Korea was doing it like internationally against countering the North Korean side. So like the first question was that how, like, why was it a major consideration for US to control Korean population just because of the spread of communism? Like I can't I can't understand why that would be the main agenda of US, because the back then government in South Korea was already doing that like very aggressively so. And no, and the United States presence in South Korea itself was doing it internationally against China and Korea. And second was, since you mentioned Malthusian theory, like was it a serious consideration for policymakers either in US or Korea? Because like um, till then, like the success in Europe through industrial revolution and like had had shown that an increase in population will not like necessarily lead to a decrease or like natural causes of decrease in population through famine or lack of resources. So just these two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Actually, again, in when they started implementing these policies, Korea's average rate was, I think, 6, and every household had about 4 to 5 kids. In 19 actually in 1953, after Korean War, there was like, because of the medicines that arrived from US, the health and the reproductive health especially, it became really nice, and it actually supplemented the reproductive health later in 1960s. That's why they also had this rise of total fertility rates of South Korea in 1960s. So for South Korea, this thinking that we should not have babies just to avoid communism, this doesn't, I don't think it comes directly from South Korea. It must have transcended from the US side, because the president of USA, President Eisenhower, he labeled this thing of rising population, especially in East Asia and also in South Asia, as a like a threat to US's national security. So they were considering it as a threat for sure. But again, the US, as Thomas Malthus, you mentioned, so basically their target was to lower the population, make the country living standard of living very high, make it very attractive, so that and at that time North Korea was having a lot of resources, so US had to put a lot of efforts in also developing South Korea, making it look better than North Korea, and also have this indirect confrontation with Soviet Union. So I think all of these reasons, combining with their anti-communism and state developmentalism, as Professor mentioned, they might have helped in framing these policies. And it is true that this communist part was pretty serious in the US. Even in UK, but in US it was pretty serious. Like, they literally thought that they would have another kind of war between the East and the West just because of population rise, and they will all suddenly come under this communist umbrella. So it was, yeah, it was pretty serious. I hope I was able to. And also one more thing I wanted to add it here. Actually, recently we had this baby export thing in Korea. Like, South Korea was putting a lot of babies for international adoption. So right after Korean War, these USA, I think Harry Bolt International, they started doing these international baby adoptions. So taking these war kids from South Korea and getting them adopted in the USA. So again, as Professor mentioned, that like inducing abortion or population control, it's kind of like I think he mentioned in the PPT also that it was kind of against their belief of resisting the population, but again they initiated and facilitated such kind of adoptions. So I don't know why that happened. I still have to do a lot of research, but maybe to balance it out also in their heads, and also help Korea to rise above the poverty and get those kids a better home.
여튼 지금 오늘은 인구 정책에 포커스가 아주 강하게 가 있지만 결국은 60, 70 미국의 저개발국 냉전 정책의 핵심은 인구 통제이지만 그 안에 구성은 산화 제한과 미국 잉여농산물 지원 두 개로 구성되어 있었고 그 중에 하나를 인도가 담당했던 거죠. 녹색 혁명, 그린 레볼루션을 통했고 그리고 이때 반공주의가 작용할 수 있는 부분은 배후지 안정입니다. 그 적색 라인과 연결되었을 때 농지 개혁을 수행하지 않는 랜드 리폼을 수행하지 않는 이 배후지가 안정되어 있을 것. 요것이 반공주의적 맥락에서 이제 갈 수가 인구 정책과 연결될 수 있는 것이고 한국의 인구 정책은 여튼 냉전적 요소가 개입하려고 하면 68년 이후를 좀 기다려야 되는 것이 아닌가라는 것이 현재까지 한국 학계가 추적했던 흔적이긴 합니다. 예, 그러나 일단 뭐 냉전 정책을 어디서 기인하는 것으로 보느냐에 따라서 시점은 조금 다양할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 예, 이상입니다.
Question to the first presentation, because I'm a social scientist, so I am trained to compare. So you compared the Guangzhou uprising and last year's demonstration, and the cultural production and the use of cultural images are quite different between the two times, even though you find some continuity, right? And we had another kind of impeachment and mass demonstration in 2016 and 17. So when do you identify and spot some meaningful changes in visualizing the resistance, because the styles are quite different, right? Recently there was kind of random kind of flags and memes, which is quite different from Guangzhou Rising, right? And you didn't mention a lot about like 2016 and 17, the Park Geun-hye impeachment, right? So when do you think was the most kind of meaningful timing of change, and who actually drove it? And if I can ask a little more about you, and then maybe the way women or some other kind of groups are depicted in the kind of those images could be quite different also from some time. And is it just generational change or time progress, or there was some like a momentum of like a reflecting and thinking about pondering on how to kind of visualize all this kind of properly?
Okay, so very complex questions, and thank you very much. But I think first of all, it's not my place to, although I wish to know as much as possible about the South Korean social movements and context. And as much as I know, I always say I don't know enough. And I'm never and will never be in a position where I can actually pinpoint which was the most meaningful in that sense, which was the most meaningful time, or what was the most meaningful time of change. Because first of all, I will be biased, and second of all, I do not have the culture or the context of a South Korean resident or a South Korean citizen. I'm biased because I will always and forever look at Gwangju, as the Gwangju uprising, as this one very influential and significant movement, because this is the first thing I actually read about as a child. So even before reading and being educated about what happened in Palestine, all the social movements and the uprisings that happened in Palestine, my first, coincidentally, story that I read was about Gwangju, and not even the Gwangju uprising. It was about the student movement during the 1920s in Gwangju. So starting from there, everything I wanted to read and everything I wanted to explore was Gwangju was the central, let's say, moment to it. And then from that, which I know as like social researchers and we're not, and as scholars we're never supposed to be biased, and we have to maintain a little bit of but at the same time, to me, I find myself always falling back to Gwangju, or like starting from that moment. So the personal answer would be that was a significant moment of change, because it is still ongoing and it's still manifesting in multiple different ways. Now, some of the ways it's manifesting are very negative and are viewed by the society as very negative. But on the most part, I think that was a very meaningful way in terms of its, first of all, continuity, because it keeps on repeating itself. And also, the 2016-2017 movement was very inspiring to me personally. I have read it, but I have read it because I wanted to understand the context. But look, talking to my friends in South Korea, talking to people who actually were on the ground, were activists during that time, that is when I see their hope. That is when, that's the only way they talk about in that kind of like sentiment and that kind of feeling. And they actually remember, and a lot of them said that we cried a lot, we were yelling, etc. And to them, for example, in comparison to the anti-Yoon protests, which they also were attending, they say, oh, this, like the anti-Yoon protest was very performative compared to the Park Geun-hye era, for example, which is something I was able to see, but I was in no place to judge. But yes, I was able to see that there is this shift. But also in terms of, lastly, in terms of generational change, first of all, yes, there is this like generational change in terms, again, as I said, like you're dealing with a generation that is living on social media. It's very native, it's very digitally, like that's the mother tongue that they're using and that's how they communicate. But at the same time, that does not necessarily mean a negative thing, because it showed actually during the anti-Yoon protest, the things we were seeing on Twitter, the things we were seeing like online specifically, it showed that there's, that again, even people, the generation that is very disinterested in politics and very, they really did not care. And specifically like on university campuses, there's a lot of, unfortunately for the past 2 decades almost, there's a lot of kind of downfall for students. But we started seeing that kind of come back to life. And the last thing I want to say is also the anti-Yoon protest was, and again, on specifically at SNU, for example, you are seeing now, and in many different universities in Seoul, you are seeing that students are coming, like student clubs and political student clubs are coming back in terms of transnational solidarity, for example. So I'm seeing a lot of clubs that are in solidarity with Palestine, but these same activists would not have been active in terms of Palestine if the anti-Yoon protests were not happening. So everything, like they kind of became, let's say, fluent in different terms of activism together, which to me, honestly, is a very positive thing in terms of this generation, at least. Thank you.
한 가지만 좀 이야기를 하자면 그 박근혜 퇴진 집회 때 이렇게 언급이 나와서, 그러니까 그 한국의 현 어떤 집회 문화를 이제 이야기를 할 때 그 박근혜 퇴진 집회부터 이어지는 사실 일련의 흐름들이 저도 굉장히 There's no translation? Oh, she's back? Okay. Let me start. Okay. Yeah. Okay. 네, 저도 박근혜 퇴진 집회 때부터 이어지는 어떤 일련의 흐름들이 현재 한국의 집회 문화를 설명하는 데 있어서도 굉장히 중요한 기점이라는 생각이 드는데, 발표자가 이제 계속 연구 관심을 가지고 계시는 어떤 이제 집회 문화라든가 아니면 어떤 이미지와 관련해서, 그리고 특히 여성의 역할과 관련해서 하나만 좀 말씀을 드리면, 그 박근혜 퇴진 집회 때 그 여성 혐오적인 어떤 이미지에 대한 언급을 하지 않고는 그 일련의 어떤 쉬프트를 설명할 수 없다는 생각이 들어요. 그러니까 2016년 집회 때는 좀 더 그 박근혜 개인에 대한 어떤 여성 혐오적인 이미지와 그 남성 중심적인 시위 문화에 대한 비판이 많이 가해졌었고, 그 집회 구성원들 중에서 이제 많은 이제 페미니스트 그룹들이 거기에 대한 이제 비판을 가했었고, 그런 비판들이 사실 쌓여서 그 현 집회 문화에서의 어떤 다른 이미지들이 그러니까 변경이 됐던, 그러니까 그 비판이 받아들여지는 일련의 흐름들이 있었고, 사실 광주 항쟁에서의 여성의 이미지도 그 역사적인 어떤 재현이 되는 그 순간들이 기점마다 저는 다르다고 생각을 하거든요. 그러니까 그 광주 항쟁에서의 어떤 여성의 역할들을 뭔가 민족의 어머니와 같은 어떤 수사로 불러일으키는 이제 그룹들이 있었고, 그런 시기들이 있었고, 그리고 그것이 다시 한번 이제 광주에서의 여성의 역할이 어떠했는가에 대한 조명들이 또 재조명이 이루어지고, 여성들에 대한 뭐 구술 작업이 다시 이제 편찬되는가, 이런 일련의 이제 학계 흐름들이 있었기 때문에 사실은 이게 단순 비교를 하기에 조금 많은 지점들을 좀 고려해야 된다라는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 지금 발표자께서 이제 뭐랄까, 관심을 가지고 계신 어떤 키워드, 그러니까 여성의 역할, 뭐 공동체, 문화적 재현, 뭐 민중 문화 이런 모든 것들이 잘 엮이기 위해서 많은 지점들을 좀 고려할 필요가 있겠다 이런 생각이 다시 한번 좀 들고 그럼에도 불구하고 너무 중요하고 흥미로운 주제이기 때문에 그리고 아까 그 남태령에 참여했던 그 사람들에 대한 이제 어떤 인터뷰도 하고 계시다는 생각 그 이야기를 들으니까 굉장히 좀 앞으로도 후속 연구가 많이 기대가 되는 발표였던 것 같습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 네.
예, 제가 섞을 이야기는 아닌 것 같긴 하지만, 예. 저는 이 타임라인의 1995와 2015 라인의 타임라인이 강주에서 현재로 오는 것에 있어서, 그리고 페미니즘 리부트 이전에 있어서 중요한 역할을 좀 하지 않았을까라는 생각이 좀 개인적으로 들었습니다. 그러니까 지금 남태령이나 오늘날 강장에서의 시위 형태는 노인들에게 엄청 충격이죠. 한국의 노인들에게 5060에게 믿을 수 없다. 그러나 사실은 20대, 30대에겐 보던 풍경이기도 하다. 다만 규모가 작다라는 생각이었어요. 개인적으로. 왜냐하면 2007년부터 한 10여 년간 있었던 차별금지법 이제 관련한 시위에서 이미 이 운동권과 지금의 학생과 대중의 결합이 한 차례 이미 형태를 잃었다라고 보여집니다. 믿을 수 없지만 NL 또는 주사는 스스로 주사라고 주장하긴 하던데 우리가 오랫동안 폐기했다고 생각했던 NL과 주사가 NL과 구운동권들이 조직을 아주 소수나마 만들었고 그들의 프레임이 다음 세대로 이어졌고 여기에 아주 소수의 페미니즘, 영페미니스트들과 키어 운동가, 장애인 운동가들이 결합했고 그래서 주제와 무관하게 연대하는 경험이 이 차별금지법 시위 등등을 통해서 여러 곳 소규모 공동체에서 이미 계속 있었습니다. 다만 이것이 이제 아주 광범위하게 다시 민중이라는 이름을 붙일 수 있을 정도로 확대된 건 2016년에 페미니즘 리부트 이후인 것 같고 그래서 강주에서 바로 오는 그 사이에 민중이 사라진 시기가 있었습니다. 한국사는. 예. 제가 민중사반이기도 한데 민중이 사라진 시기가 있었기 때문에 이 단절과 변화가 조금 더 섬세하게 접근되면 아주 흥미롭다라는 생각이었습니다. 주제 넘었습니다. 예.
If we have no more questions or comments, I think we can close this session. I think obviously we had the luxury of having extra time for much deeper discussion, so we got a lot of insights. So big hands to all these people, and let's close this session. Thank you.